Welcome to the Business as Mission podcast, dedicated to those who long to see God glorified in business and the nations reached for Christ. Your host is Mike Bayer, longtime BAM leader and founder of Third Path Initiative, an online education resource for starting and growing BAM businesses around the world.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Business as Mission podcast. I'm here with my new friend, Andrew Brummett. And he's somebody introduced to me by my colleague, Bob Bush, and we were talking about just different people that Bob's a funny guy. He knows everybody, number one. And every now and then he'll run across somebody. He just contacts me, says, you got to talk to this guy. And Andrew is one of those guys. And he says, you got to interview him. You got to get him on the podcast. So we had a chat. And as Andrew unpacked his story a little bit, I thought, yeah, Bob's right. I'm glad I'm getting to know him and excited about his vision and glad to have him on the podcast. So Andrew, number one, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you on.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I'm really excited to be here and to just chat today.
We'll have a good time. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, it's good for you to know that really you got to imagine two guys getting to know each other over coffee, right? This is just informal. I haven't asked Andrew to make a presentation or a speech. He may do that. I haven't asked him to, and it's fine if he does, but it really is just you're sitting in on a coffee conversation, and Andrew's got a great background, and he's going to tell us, I'm calling it the Brookside School. I know it's more than that. So let me just stop before I get myself into hot water here and say, Andrew, in addition to welcome, tell us a little bit just of your background and what it is that God has been doing in your life that's led you to the place that we're having this conversation.
Boy, where does one begin, right? I think that, one of the things I was thinking back, I don't know, recently, you don't always have I certainly don't have a straight line story, but there is a straight line of interests though. And even when I went to college at University of Texas at Austin, I was interested in three things. I was interested in teaching. I became a substitute teacher that fall of 1998 it was. And I also wanted to do international business even back then and do cross-cultural stuff. And I wasn't even a very mature Christian yet, actually, at that time. And then the other thing I got involved in was actually politics. And the summer of 1999, I read my first kind of policy paper about educational freedom or school choice. And I wanted to participate in that, and I wanted to see that happen. And here we're 25 years later, and it's starting to happen in a way that nobody would have predicted. And sort of these three strands, this desire to help the poor, to spread opportunity, a deep interest in international business that has become an interest in BAM, specifically the more mature I became in my faith, and then this interest in teaching and school leadership all kind of coming together with the Brookside School.
So it's funny you say your story's not a straight line. Nobody's is. That's definitely not.
Yeah.
but I'm convinced God is the master of conflation, that he makes all of these, from our perspective, these outliers, these things that appear to be disconnected. And he says, well, watch what I can do with this. And he begins to bring them together, and you say, oh, that's what this is. And of course, the fun is, 10 years from now, you look back and say, oh, I thought I had it figured out back then, but I didn't. Now I do. And so that's the journey. So the Brookside School, when we were first talking, you described it as really a very, it's a business. Number one, it's a foundation of business. It's high level education. It's driven by school choice. It's driven by a desire to make an impact in a society and a community. Where are you going with that? I mean, you're not the only one. This is an ongoing concern. There's a website. There's a school. I mean, this is a pretty exciting thing. So assume I'm a guy that started in political science. We have that in common. I ended up in education, or transferred to education, so I wouldn't have to take French because it was killing me. Nice. And he ended up graduating with history because that was the shortest way out. All of that to say, I love education, but when you say Brookside School and what this thing is, help us wrap our head around that.
Absolutely. So it is essentially a system of micro campuses or micro schools. We define the system as the school. So we're going to be a global school with many campuses all over the world is our dream. And each campus is no more than 150 students. It's kind of the working definition of a micro school. Unlike most micro schools, and some of these have hit just phenomenal growth. So like Acton Academy from Austin, Texas, they just went, exponential growth throughout the world. And so they're lower cost models, and they're easily reproduced and scaled and multiplied. And that's what we're aiming to do, but with a model that is more informed by classical educational principles. So we don't use a lot of technology. It's pretty low tech. We do weave the campuses together through educational technology, and we do use some with the students, but not every student has a laptop. They don't need it. Most of what we do is just good old-fashioned education. And it's actually, in many ways, kind of a turn the page backwards to the 19th century, where America, largely educated all of its people through these one-room schoolhouses. And we're a return to that. And I want to connect at the front end where this meets discipleship. So as we know in BAM, listening to people's presentations and where their heart is, discipleship is always part of that. Well, in education, Christian education, that can be much more impactful because you have so much time with the students, except when you don't, right? Most teachers in most schools see their students for 1 year, and then they say goodbye at the end of that year. And I began just kind of thinking about it, just kind of chewing on the experience of being a teacher. And I've asked teachers, at what point of the year do you feel like your class is going just maximum efficiency and effectiveness? That students have figured out how you teach and are learning optimally because of that. You figured out how they learn and are teaching at your maximum because of that. And almost universally, it's towards the end of the year, maybe 3/4 of the year, maybe 2/3 of the way through the year. And if you're in
in that setting, it's taken 6 months at least.
Yes.
For a teacher to begin to feel like he or she is gelling with a student. Right. Up until then, it's sort of like dating. Now they're really getting serious. And
that's right.
And the year's almost over. And
the year's almost over. That's right. That's so normal because it's just the learning curve with anything. You need two new people that want to get to know each other and become friends and really become a team. It takes a while, right? And we all know that. But our model, this kind of factory-like model where you kind of get your stamp in this grade and you go to the next grade and you have this team of teachers in this big building where you move from one class to the other and then one floor to the other. It's not designed to foster relationships. It's designed to sort of become transactional in many ways. But what a multi-grade micro school classroom does, it puts you in the same group, in the same class with the same teacher for 2, 3, or 4 years. And that is where the discipleship can really happen. That's where you're mentoring students, not just teaching them. You're leading them through life in a way that gets the closest in the educational kind of K-12 educational space. It gets the closest to how Jesus taught his disciples of any model I've seen. And it's impactful. And so I experienced this. I was started off in the charter school world, classical charter school, helped open one, taught 5th grade. And then I went to more of a full-time classical Christian school. But I was hungry for something smaller for my own children, and also hungry to provide more opportunity for people that just didn't have the means to afford it. And so I got recruited to go up to Philadelphia to help lead a school up there that was doing this. And I learned really what has become the Brookside model there, and working with West Africans, with mostly Liberian families that had come out as refugees and asylum seekers from the Liberian Civil War in the 80s and 90s, and ended up in the Philadelphia area in horrible schools, in tough neighborhoods, being bullied, not having educational opportunity. And they would come and find Christ Academy and hear about it from their friends and family and say, we need your help. Can you educate my child? And we saw just tremendous turnarounds where a student's complete educational trajectory was completely 180 degrees turnaround. And that has follow-on effects, right, in their life trajectory and in their spiritual path with God as well. And so we saw people baptized and join the church and just all kinds of fruit from that. So that was the pinnacle of my experience, was learning that, and I've been trying to reproduce it since then. And that's one way or another led to the Brookside School in Austin, Texas.
So I'm going to push back a little bit on the model to understand it.
Sure.
So first of all, when you say micro school, it's really a small school. 100
Right.
to 150 students kind of is, I guess, the sweet spot. Within that, there might be 5, 10 classes.
Right.
So it's very small classes, but the students and the teachers journey together, almost like a cohort, like a community, right? I mean,
That's right.
You mentioned discipleship. Jesus said, "Hey, come and follow me." Not come sit in my classroom. It was come and be a part of my life, and so that you can see that it's a private school. So I'm assuming there's a tuition that a parent pays.
Right.
I'll come back to that question because obviously that's the one everybody's going to want to know about. But I'm trying to fit this, in the grand scheme of education, and particularly in America. But I know that this has implications globally. So don't let me go too far, on the wrong road here. Jump in and say, nope, you're missing the whole point, and I won't be offended. But what I'm thinking about is like, all right, you've got first of all, we got a totally broken system, right? I mean, we know the outputs are disgusting. They're just it's frightening. And, we see crime, we see broken families, we see all kinds of things coming out of this dysfunctional education system. The tendency is to blame the teacher, that they're an easy mark, right? I mean, that's obviously who we're going to blame, which is sometimes the right place, but usually not. Usually not. Folks they're trying their heart out. They're working. They're giving it their all. The system doesn't work, and they're beating themselves up against the system. So, so I would think almost kind of maybe a continuum, Andrew. And then this is where I'll shut up and let you say, "Yeah, you got it," or "Well, let's go back to square one." But it seems like the continuum, on the one hand, is sort of the public school system, large. I graduated from a high school with 1,700 students. I'm hearing of schools out there now with 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 students. I mean, these are enormous facilities. Right. Number one, it is a factory. You're going through the grades, you're going through the motions, and you move on. If you do well, you move on. If you don't do well, they move you on anyway. I mean, it's get the product out the door, and then its kissing cousin is very often the large Christian school, the private Christian academy. I started one on Hilton Head Island along with some other folks 40 years ago. And it's now a very large, very beautiful campus, kind of the not the Brookside, but there's another one, the Stony Brook School. It's got that sort of feel to it. But it's still a great big school. It's the same model. It just, the people teaching are Christian, and that's fine. And then the other end of the spectrum is homeschool, which
that's right.
All of my grandkids have been homeschooled, and then they've also been involved in cottage schools, which are little local gatherings for particular subjects and so forth. So I've seen both ends of that. My daughters graduated from large public schools, did well. My grandkids have all been homeschooled, and now they're starting to graduate. This is neither of those. This is something entirely different. Maybe it's not even on that continuum. Maybe that's the wrong way to think about it. How would you place it, what I'm saying and your concept together?
Yeah, so there is kind of generally micro schools. As soon as you get a couple families together, whether at a school building or at your home, and you do it either full or part-time, where you're not with your own student anymore necessarily, you're not with your own child, that can be called a micro school, and I think that's appropriate. What Brookside is, and we can operate part-time and we can operate online, and I've kind of figured out a way to do a cohort, which you use the perfect word because a multi-grade group that goes together, we call it a cohort, and that's how we think of it. So we want to start cohorts of about 20 students and 2 adults and grow them up to about 50 total, and that could be 2 classrooms, it often will be, and we ran an entire K through 12 campus in 4 classrooms in Philadelphia. So we had a K through 2 class that my wife taught. We had a 3rd through 6th grade class. We had a 7th and 8th grade kind of middle school class, and then we had a high school class. And it was a great, everybody there. we had no more than 50 people at that school total. And so you knew everybody. The older students knew the younger students. And that right there is impactful, actually, and not something you see in those big box kind of models. And that has benefits, actually, because when you think about, you mentioned sort of the huge school, and I think, this is that spectrum you're talking about. The smaller the school gets, the more, the richer the relationships can become. And you have to see someone else as an individual person. You know their name, you know something about them. You have to learn how to get along with them. In a large school, that's just not the case. You become a statistic in the sense that either the school has to see you as a statistic because there's so many students, or you will actively kind of self-select into a clique of some kind of subgroup. Maybe the people that like this kind of music, or the people that have this ethnic identity, or the people that are Christian, or whatever it may be, because you want something that is a community, right? You're hungry for that. Everybody needs that. Your soul is designed for it, right? Genesis tells us right there, it's good for man not to be alone. And so you'll find it, but you'll find it what I would call an artificial version of it. It's not lifelike. It's not family-like. A multi-grade cohort where you're with other people of different ages, it allows you to have a more family-like environment, which is perfect for Christian formation, right? Because we're to treat each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. Well, that makes more sense if I'm the oldest student in the room, I act like the older sibling, right? And I have a role of leadership. It just comes naturally, like the way God made age to work. And the same with the younger student. The younger student will be like the elephant, following the big elephant, and actually be discipled by a fellow student in how things work there, and how to get along, and how to be successful. And that is incredibly powerful and very unusual in schools. And so it's interesting because you're right. I mean, the schools get bigger and bigger in many ways because there's efficiencies to scale, but not really for education. The quality does not go up. Now, you do get more bells and whistles, right? Like you get an AstroTurf football field. I mean, why wouldn't you want to go there, right?
Yeah.
Well, is that the point of education, right? Like, what is the point of education? And if you get to asking some more fundamental questions, the bells and whistles can never be the point, right? They're nice to haves, but they're not must-haves. They don't define education itself. And so a small school, a small micro school, micro campus can be a place where you can really dive deeply into the actual point of education and be richly formed and richly educated, and then find another place. My son plays football on a league team. He loves it. That's not something that he was able to do at school, and he won't be able to do at school until a few years down the road when we may add that. But that's okay. We can find a place for him to play football. I'm more interested in his heart and his mind being formed, and his body being formed in a Godward direction in Christ.
So when I look at history and I look back, you mentioned the 19th century, and I think about the pre-industrial revolution, education had a purpose, and it was general, it was classical. It wasn't just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but there was a purpose for all of that. Many of these kids could read Greek and Latin. I mean, this is not ignorant country people learning how to shuck corn. I mean, they were well educated in things that we never touched base, but the point of education was to build a well-rounded human being.
That's right.
And then when the Industrial Revolution came along, the educational system became the factory for factory workers, right? I mean, even the thing, raise your hand, stand in line, all those things. We when I was a kid, and it was a long time ago, but we had 21 minutes to get from our room to the lunchroom, get our food, eat our food, put our tray up, and get ready to march back down to our room.
Right.
It was I didn't know it then, but it was very industrial. Even the physical plant was kind of a cross between a prison, a hospital, and a factory. And so I never thought of that, but we're right. Yeah. We were being educated to work in an industrial world, and that makes perfect sense. That's what the economy needed. Not anymore, right? So it's a time for a fresh look at what it is we're doing, the education that we're creating. So it's starting to make sense to me now. I got to ask you some specifics. One, let's just jump right to cost. Because I mean,
Yep.
as a grandfather of 7 grandkids, my grandkids were, as I mentioned, have been homeschooled, been in model cottage school. A couple of them now go to private Christian schools. I mean, their parents have really done the best they can to get them educated in a godly way. And it's, homeschool's not expensive. It's not free, but it's not expensive. Private Christian academies are incredibly expensive.
Right. That's right.
Somebody's going to listen to this going, okay, how much does this cost?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love kind of rough estimates, and I would say, generally speaking, the cost of a 5-day-a-week, micro Brookside education is a third of what you would pay for a classical Christian 5-day school. Okay, so it's a third of the cost, and it's triple the impact. And the way I like to define that is, in Austin, Texas, you can get great education for in the $24,000, right? It's easy to pay $24,000 for a 5-day private classical school education or Christian school education, and it's high quality, sure, but it's not high impact. And let me define that. So if you come into a school and you haven't had a lot of educational opportunities and you're behind, maybe you're 3 grade levels behind, which as I've been working with refugee and asylum seeking families that we're trying to raise funds to provide this for in Austin, they're often 3 grades below grade level, and no private school is going to accept them because and that's the right decision too, because they're not going to be able to help them. If you come in and you've been well educated, you've had a lot of good opportunities, then it's an excellent school and you'll continue to learn. What high impact means is you can come in at a low point and you leave at a high point, and you've closed that gap. That's high impact. So we like to say kind of triple the impact at a third of the price with Brookside School. Now, how do we accomplish that? Well, we do a few things. One is we partner with churches. Okay, so churches have space usually. If church has any kind of a Sunday school program whatsoever, even if it doesn't, we could still use much of the space, even if it's just a parish hall. But we find we can use whatever space, we can use whatever size of space. We're very adaptable, very agile in what we need. But we'll come with a church and say, this is just sitting empty. It's being air conditioned, but sitting empty 5 days a week, right? Probably 6 days a week most of the time. We'll come in and we'll pay you rent. Okay. We want to bless the churches and pay them something. We don't want them to give it to us for free. We want it to be a partnership.
And it's not costing the local church anything. They're actually receiving,
right,
if they want, receiving something for this. So
that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a key first point. Churches start schools, and having been there, done that, it costs a ton of money to start.
I like to say, a big building private school, I don't think you can start it without $1 million these days. I think that's roughly as I've heard about schools starting and the amount of money that they have to raise to get those started, that's about what we're looking at. A Brookside school, $50,000 would be totally fine. It's really about relationships. It's about getting some people together at a church with relationships to gather students. But the upfront costs are really, really low because you're using stuff that's already there. So we use churches, and they're providing us a much lower than commercial rate of rent, right? That's the win-win. They get something, and they get a church there that they can partner in ministry with and see students discipled there and brought to Christ or formed in Christ. And we're getting way below commercial rent. So no church would need to usually charge commercial rent. That's actually quite high. So that's part of it. Then the other part of it is just having the multi-grade classroom lowers your costs. You don't have to have one teacher per grade, and that's a great cost savings. And then one of the other things that we do is we rotate the curriculum. So a lot of micro schools, and if people hear that word, they often think laptops because students are on computers, in order to differentiate learning in that environment, that multi-grade environment. We do 2 things. We rotate curriculum that we can rotate. So we rotate science topics, we rotate history and literature topics, and then we use ability groups for the things that we can't. So there's a math group, the Algebra 1 class meets on this day, with this teacher, and then the other days they're working on their homework while the next group, maybe the pre-algebra or the geometry class, is meeting. And so you can have one teacher teaching multiple ability groups doing what they need to do. So we use curriculum that helps us do that well. And then we use technology to tie together the campuses so that they function as a unit. We had a prototype, a beta test in Philadelphia. We had a school in Scranton and a school in Philadelphia, and each teacher was teaching each other's students through just Zoom technology and Google Classroom. I mean, it was not fancy, but it worked great. And so we had two high schools, working together simultaneously, and each teacher was teaching the other students. Well, that was a huge cost savings, as you can imagine, for those campuses. So in all those different ways, we bring the cost way down so that we can provide more opportunity. And that's something that what I realized when I was trying to, run a school like this. I could go out and raise $50,000 in donations to serve the poor with this great education, or I could cut $50,000 out of the budget. The net effect is the same on the bottom line, right? And we need to realize that in order to provide more opportunity for more people, we've got to figure out cost savings that we can. And homeschool is one version of that, right? The trade-off, of course, is that you have to have a parent at home and one who speaks English and is capable of educating the kids. That's just not every family in America. Often single parent families or dual income families where you're living in a place like Austin, Texas, where it's really difficult to have just one parent working and being able to afford the cost of living. Or we work with refugees and asylum seekers. Many times the parent doesn't speak English. There's no way that they could do a homeschool model, right? So they need that full-time model. So what do they get, right? They're in tough neighborhoods, in bad schools, and yes, there's a lot of bells and whistles. And what that looks like if you're poor is, free and reduced lunch and breakfast. Or it looks like a lot of the wraparound services that schools provide that are more like social services, not the educational part, but the social services part, which are phenomenal. I mean, that's great. The busing, that kind of thing. So we're actively trying to figure out ways to close that gap in easily reproducible and kind of funded ways to just get students to the school if their parents aren't driving yet because they just arrived in the United States and need a driver's license, right? Now, we were already working on all this stuff, and then we got the news last year that one state after another state after another state had passed universal school choice. And I mean, my whole just countenance shifted because finally, right? It's like the old movies when the cavalry arrives, right? It's like finally they get there, right? Yep. And you can breathe easily. And for somebody that's been working towards educational opportunity, I mean, almost my whole life, man, it's refreshing to know that states are saying, hey, listen, if we're going to make you go to school, we're going to pay for it no matter where you want to go, including Christian options. And that is a huge blessing. And it's just coming online. So it's like we have 12 states now. That's over 20% of the country now has universal school choice or close to it. And so all of a sudden you've got these emerging markets where you could, because we can come in. So let's say $8,000 is the typical amount, roughly speaking. Sometimes more, sometimes a little less. We can come in, and that's all we need to charge is $8,000. And we're actually making money on that and providing high impact, high quality education to the extent that we can then take part of the proceeds and provide scholarships for people in states that do not have universal school choice. And so by the other way to keep the costs down, just like large corporations, is the economies of scale. So we're going to scale this globally so that all of the campuses benefit from the network that they're part of. And that has really practical effects, like such as very few private Christian schools offer benefits for teachers. Mm-hmm. Right? I can't wait till we scale to the extent that we can offer benefits to our teachers and just take care of families better. We're organizing as a public benefit corporation so that this is like a legal form created for BAM, right? It's like the triple bottom line. I got to do is add the spiritual bottom line. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to attract the capital that we need to scale quickly. You cannot do that in a nonprofit model, right? You just cannot attract the capital that you need to scale globally, to scale quickly. We want to reward investors who are willing to provide that capital to provide educational opportunity for folks. And then the other thing is we want a strong, unified kind of strong leadership structure that a corporate structure can provide. But that public benefit piece means that we can be fully mission driven and take care of the bottom line, but also take care of the social impact, the environmental impact, and then of course the spiritual impact. And so this is where my kind of desire to interest in business's mission and my interest in educational opportunity kind of came together. And I realized, hey, both of these things could actually work together and be even better by combining them.
We'll pause here for a very brief message. Third Path Initiative brings accessible, affordable, and actionable BAM training to the world. For example, a free course, Introduction to Business as Mission, is available in 6 languages: English, Azeri, Spanish, Romanian, Ukrainian, and Russian. Check it out at thirdpathinitiative.com/all-courses.
My mind is torn. Part of me wants to go down into the details. The operator part of me wants to get down in, like, where do you find your teachers? How do you pay all that stuff? I'm not going to go there, even though that's part of where my head goes. But thinking through some of the bigger questions, obviously right now there's a focus on the United States, and that makes sense. This is home, start New Jerusalem, build it out. You went somewhere that I'm deeply passionate about, and a lot of our listeners are, and that's the refugee community. I mean, from a pure global missions perspective,
right?
Politics aside, God is bringing the unreached people of the world to us. He's putting them in our community. Forget the border questions. That's a different animal altogether. But just the asylum-seeking community, they plug them into a public school, doesn't work well. Homeschooling, as you point out, isn't really going to work, particularly if the parents don't speak English or their English is poor. So this sounds like something that could be, really applied quickly there. So you've got your Christian community, you've got your asylum or your refugee community that this could apply to. And then talk a little bit about the global implications of this. They're coming to us, but obviously there are, and I'll tee this up with, this is not a leading question, but I talk a lot with businesses, mission practitioners, as well as traditional missionaries working in other countries, and their schooling options are pretty limited. There's homeschool. I mean, right? And again, all the things there that make it hard here, it's probably 100 times harder there.
Or illegal, right?
Yeah, or illegal. And then you've got they send their kids off to boarding school, which turns my head inside out. I remember, just quick side note, I remember sitting in a class at Columbia International University where a group of mission kids just spontaneously began to dish on their parents for sending them off to boarding school. And it wasn't, it was anger, but it was pain, it was abandonment, it was bad. And I know the old traditional mission model is, well, I'll sacrifice my kids for Jesus. Well, the good news is Jesus doesn't ask us to sacrifice our kids. Right. That was Moloch that did that, right? Not Yahweh.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but there's an option, and then there's, some sending them to public schools locally, which is good and bad. I mean, so how would this roll out? What could it look like in the missional community?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's one that is sort of constantly on the dashboard for us. I mean, we are starting very local in Austin, Texas. We're going to first hit kind of school choice states, places like Florida and Alabama, Arizona, North Carolina. They're growing, but that is like a springboard, right? That's part of what we want to do, but that's also places to get scaling and get rolling so that we can go globally. And just to answer your question, I want to talk about my experience. I went out to the United Arab Emirates thinking I was going to be a full-time pastor. That's always something that I think God smiles at and laughs about, because I've never been a full-time pastor, but I've thought I was supposed to be several times, and I stopped asking, God, am I supposed to be a full-time pastor? The answer is no, stop asking, So, but I do have pastoral experience, and I went out there to pastor, ended up working for a mission hospital called the Oasis Hospital in United Arab Emirates in Al Ain. A lot of BAM people listening in in that country will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's called Connaught Hospital now. And it's a phenomenal experience. I mean, I just saw what the front line looks like. And one of the reasons we had to leave, there was two reasons we had to leave. We couldn't afford to live there anymore. We were about to have our fifth child, and the cost of living there, we just couldn't sustain after my hospital job wrapped up. So, they fulfilled my contract, but they couldn't do more than that. And the church had grown, but it couldn't sustain us. And I couldn't get the funding to do any kind of business as mission endeavor. And I was thinking about a school even then, but I didn't have the training to do it really. But we couldn't afford to be there. So we would have had to raise a ton of donations without any base to start from. We were with a small church that didn't have a lot of contacts. And the educational piece, we couldn't afford it for our kids. You couldn't go to the local schools there, but you had to be in a school, and you weren't even allowed to homeschool, actually. People did it, but they weren't technically allowed to, at least at the time. And so the lack of good schools and the inability to sustain ourselves financially led us home. We'd hoped to be there 20 years. We were there 3. And so, but that's what stuck with me as an obvious, if you can go somewhere and through business as mission, sustain yourself, A, and open doors for the gospel, B, and just open doors for life with people, right? But then also have an education opportunity for your children so you can flourish and you can stay there longer because of that. I mean, a lot of people come back because of school.
Absolutely.
So that's what we want to do. I mean, I want to, continue to go to business as mission conferences and just network with business as mission people, because we want our schools. We have a saying: every teacher, a BAM entrepreneur. We want every teacher to be trained to be an entrepreneur, to think like a BAM missionary in starting their microcampus. And we want everybody to start a microcampus. You don't just get to sign up and be a teacher. You got to actually be an entrepreneur too. But we want to partner with BAM businesses throughout the world and do it with the same thing we do with churches, right? If there's no church to partner with, we want to partner with a BAM business. Maybe there's a factory that has a small space that they use to have their team meetings. Well, we could have a one cohort, one room schoolhouse in that space while they're not using it, and be a blessing not only to the Christian families there, but I mean, like in Philadelphia at Christ Academy, where I was led there for 4 years, we had a Muslim family. And we didn't have a lot of families. It was a small school, but one of them was a Muslim family. We had a Hindu family. We had a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses. We even had a Mormon family. And these people knew what they're getting into. We were a church school. We did, morning worship chapel every single morning there. They were getting taught the scriptures and the gospel. I mean, they knew what they were getting into, but it was a superior education to anything else they had access to. So they came, right? And that's what we want to be. We want to be known for being a Christian school that is actively serving all people and blessing them with an excellent education for everyone. That's what we want to be about.
So when I think about, I look at this as first question: how many of these micro schools do you currently have under the Brookside model?
Yeah, so Brookside is the newest sort of iteration. So I went up to Philadelphia. I learned how to do it at Christ Academy. I helped a sister parish start Atonement Academy. And then I also helped another parish, another church in Scranton start King Alfred's Academy. And then we're working on the one in Austin, Texas. So I've been also working at a large school, collaborative model, classical Christian school, since I got to Austin. We came down here for my dad's sake, and my dad is aging and has dementia, and even before that he was needing help. So we had to uproot from Philadelphia and come to Austin, and we wanted to bring this model with us, and that's what we've been working on, and we'll open this fall. But we're still trying to we're in the seed stage of this. So we are Christ Academy. COVID happened, and Christ Academy overnight lost all of its advances with donors, lost all of its applicant pool because the African families in that area no longer wanted to be in school after COVID. And so COVID really did a number. We ended up changing the model, changing the name of the school. It's still doing that. Church is still doing educational ministry there, but it looks a lot different. Atonement Academy, we could not get it off the ground. We had phenomenal education happening at Christ Academy. We had phenomenal education happening at Atonement Academy. But the financial part and the basic marketing stuff is where we weren't able to succeed because people don't have educational freedom there, right? And then King Alfred's Academy is still hanging on as a 2-day-a-week program created kind of during COVID. So we've kind of beta tested the thing. We know that it works. We know the educational impact that it can have. What we're trying to get is to have it 5 days a week in a place where it can flourish. And that will probably be Texas as one of the places in the near future when I believe we're going to get school choice. But we need to go where there's a market and there's a demand, and we need to reproduce campuses, and that's our goal. So we're definitely in the seed stage. We're hitting up a lot of the Lion's Den gatherings of Christian investors and telling them about what we're doing. And a lot of people are excited about what we're doing, and we think it's a phenomenal product, a phenomenal education that we can offer. So that's kind of where we are.
It's interesting. There's some of the questions you always ask when you're looking at a business that's in startup mode. One is, what's the dragon you're trying to kill? And you're pretty clear on that. How do you kill it? You're clear on that. Why is your method of killing dragons better than everybody else's? And then the question nobody ever gets to is, well, how many dragons really are there? And so so the first three questions, like, okay, I'm there. And then I'm thinking my mind is going to just in the United States alone, there are countless dragons.
Yeah, roughly 15% of any population group is school-age kids. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
And in America, in the states that have some form of, so this group called EdChoice does all the stats on this stuff, but there are 20 million kids now that have some form of school choice they have access to. Now, a lot of that's brand new as of last year. Roughly 30% of all families would like a private school option for their child and do not have that. They don't go to the private school, but they would like to. So what is 30% of 20 million? Like that's the effective market that we're dealing with in the United States. So it's huge, right? But I tell you what, the people's loyalty to that image of what a school is supposed to look like and feel like based on kind of their own glory days in a way. I mean, what are the things we idolize in America, right? We idolize youth for one thing, right? So our youth means we can idolize youth while also idolizing ourselves, right? And so we kind of have a tendency to put ourselves on a pedestal when we were teenagers, right? And where does that happen? Well, it happened in this big place called usually a public school. And so the allegiance to that's very, very strong, even though it's not working anymore. There's still a lot of inherent allegiance to it and kind of a resistance of the status quo, a resistance of it to change. And that's kind of what we're up against. But I'll tell you, that's why I love working with refugees and asylum seekers as just kind of the initial kind of adopters, because they don't have it working right. They're more willing to make a change. But that's true of so many more people today. They're just waking up and realizing, hey, we're paying all this tax money. We're giving more and more money every single year to the system that's just not working. The results stagnated a long time ago and began going down after COVID. And yet the money keeps going up. So it's not the money. That's not the solution.
No, you've got a high level of dissatisfaction, even desperation. And obviously a lot of people are not aware of workable options. I mean, again, in their minds, it's like the big dollar private school, homeschool. There's not a lot. They don't think in terms of this micro school concept. So I'm excited to see this work out. I'm excited to get the message out and let people start looking at it. I will have all of your contact information in the show notes and encourage listeners, anything that didn't make sense based on my questions or just the fact that, hey, this is kind of new, go to the site and learn and then interact with Andrew and his team. We're not asking you to start one tomorrow. We're not asking you to invest $100,000, although I suspect a check would be welcome. That's not the point of this broadcast. But start looking at it and realizing, this is kind of my pitch, and I'll give you the last word. for now, start recognizing there is a good option. There really is. That not only is Christian and discipleship focused, but it actually is built on a model that we all know historically worked. And we're dealing with a model today that historically does not work. So check it out. So, all right. So, Andrew, we're going to come up on time. I look forward to following your progress and keeping in touch and hearing more and more about what you're doing and how it's progressing. What is your final, I won't say pitch, because that's not really what we're looking for, but what's your final word to our listeners to what should they do?
I think it's to realize the power of Christian education in discipleship, right? So if what we care about is discipleship, we know that the window of opportunity for people staying with the Lord and coming to the Lord in those teenage years in particular, that, late childhood, early adulthood, that's the sweet spot. I mean, researchers are telling us like that's when you really need it. And you need somebody in addition to your parents, you need a mentor in the faith, and the more adults you have that actually care about you, that know you, that love you, and a community where you feel known and loved and cared for and seen and welcomed. That's hugely impactful and powerful. And we should want that not only for our own children, and go find that wherever it can be found. And I realize this is not the only way to do it, but this is a powerful way to do it. And it's a way that can rapidly impact and provide this for other people, and including people that don't yet know Christ, but would love to be welcomed and known and cared for in their educational setting. So I think it's hugely powerful. Let's think about it. Let's figure out how to do it. And I know, people could go out and start one tomorrow, and I'd rejoice. I don't want to be the only person doing this. I'd love to help people do it too. But I think there's power, in being together doing it. And that's what we want to be as a BAM company.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, we could go on and on. You've got my head spinning, and we probably just scratched the surface of what this is all about. So that's why I encourage our listeners, check it out. Look at the Brookside School. You will see all the links, all the information in the show notes. And I'm assuming they can reach out to you or anybody on the team and just say, hey, I want to learn more. I'd like to become involved, or, whatever. So it's fantastic. This is, like I say, you got my head spinning. That didn't happen very often. But having started a couple of schools and having taught myself, having watched my kids come through public school, my grandkids go through private and primarily homeschool, boy, I could see a world of opportunity here, no pun intended. So, Andrew, thanks for being with us. Promise you'll come back, give us updates, keep us posted.
I'd love to.
Fantastic to have you.
I love what y'all are doing, and may God bless your efforts.
You too. Thank you, brother.
Thanks for listening to the Business as Mission podcast. For more information, go to thirdpathinitiative.com or tryventure.com. Please share this podcast and give us a review wherever you listen.